Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be learning how to airbrush for the absolute beginner. And I have to stress, this video is aimed at the absolute beginner, so you've only just bought an airbrush and you've not used it yet. And in this video we're going to be showing you how to spray the airbrush and also how to clean the airbrush and how to hook it up to the compressor. So I hope you enjoy this video guys, and let's get started. We start off by plugging in the power lead with the compressor turned off. Then we attach the air hose to the airbrush compressor outlet. In this video I'm using the Harder and Steamback Evolution Silverline 2-in-1 airbrush. And what that basically means is it comes with 2 needle nozzle sets, and we'll get onto that a little later on in the video. But here I'm just attaching the airbrush to the hose of the compressor. Now we've attached the air hose to the compressor and to the airbrush, it's time to turn the compressor on. The compressor I'm using, the Sparmax TC620X, has a regulator and a pressure gauge. It's important to change the pressure of the airbrush to what you want to work at. I want to work at 20 psi, and as you can see the gauge is reading 40 psi at the moment. So I pull up the regulator cap, I twist it round while depressing the trigger on the airbrush, and as this is happening I'm able to turn the dial and get the pressure down to 20 psi. Here I have some products in front of me that are really important to airbrushing. I have some airbrush cleaner, which is very important to clean out your airbrush and make sure there's no residual paint left in the airbrush. Airbrush thinner. This is to thin down the paints if they're not spraying correctly out your airbrush. It depends on the needle nozzle set you've got, but the rule of thumb is the smaller your needle nozzle on your airbrush, the more likely you are to use airbrush thinner for your paints. I'm using pre-thinned Vallejo Game Air acrylic paints, and out of most needle nozzles they don't need thinning, but on again smaller needle nozzle sets you might need to use the airbrush thinner so the paint can spray correctly out your airbrush. Now we're going to add a little paint to our airbrush. First of all, I shake the paint to make sure it's mixed correctly in the bottle. Airbrush paint goes a long way, so I only put 2 or 3 drops in. I'm using a 0.4mm needle nozzle set, so I don't need to thin the paints in this instance. To release air, we push down on the airbrush trigger, and to release paint, we pull back on the airbrush lever. Basically, the more you pull back on the lever, the more paint's released, as you can see here. Each spot that I'm using, I'm pulling slightly further back on the airbrush trigger, which is making the round dots bigger. You can also control the size of the dots by moving the airbrush closer to your object source. Here I'm working really closely to get small dots of circles. Here I'm doing an exercise which just gets you used to the flow of the airbrush. As I bring the airbrush closer, the lines get thinner. As I move the airbrush further away and pulling back on the lever at exactly the same amount, the lines will get thicker. It's just a case of practicing on the airbrush with loops and different size shapes to get used to how much to pull back on the lever and how close or far away from your object source you need to be to get the right line thickness that you want to be working with. Here I've made some lines and some circles on paper. It's to test hand to eye coordination. So here I'm trying to get the dots in the little squares that you can see on the grid. Here I'm bracing my left hand with my right hand and trying to closely follow the circle with the airbrush. This helps with accuracy of spraying the airbrush. Here I'm using the same principle again, making lines going from left to right and from right to left. After finished spraying, it's important to clean out our airbrush. I start by placing some water into the airbrush cup and using a paint to swill all the excess paint around and mix it with the water and flush it straight out the airbrush into the cleaning pot, which is also an essential purchase when you start airbrushing, to get a cleaning pot to remove excess paint from the cup. Once I've flushed the water out, then I'm going to add some airbrush cleaner just to make sure any residual paint that was left in the airbrush cup is removed. After cleaning out the airbrush cup, we're now able to use a new paint colour in the airbrush cup, and as you can see, it will spray nice and smoothly out of the airbrush. After cleaning the blue paint out of the airbrush, as I did with the red paint early on in the video, I'm going to take the airbrush apart and clean it. I start off by unscrewing the needle chucking nut and taking the needle out from the back of the airbrush. Now I'm unscrewing the needle cap, the nozzle cap, and out will come the fluid nozzle. I'm going to now clean the airbrush needle. So I spray a little bit of airbrush cleaner on some kitchen roll, and I always work from the back of the needle towards the front. I never go from the front to the back because I could jab my finger with the needle or I risk damaging the delicate tip of the needle. Here I'm adding a little bit of airbrush cleaner to a cotton bud. I'm cleaning the needle cap here and the fluid nozzle. Here I'm using a small brush just to clean the outside of the fluid nozzle. You can use dental brushes to do this job. Here I'm making sure there's no residual paint or clogged paint in the fluid nozzle. I'm using Harder and Steenback's reamer, but if you don't have the reamer you can also use the needle. Place the needle gently to the front of the nozzle and twist it round to make sure that there's no paint stuck in the fluid nozzle. Although not an essential purchase, I highly recommend picking up Harder & Steenback's Reamer. It really does help get rid of residual paint out the fluid nozzle. I mentioned earlier on in the video that the Harder & Steenback Evolution Silverline airbrush that I have is a 2-in-1, which basically means that there's 2 needle nozzle sets. One was 0.4mm and one was 0.2mm. Here I'm swapping out the 0.4mm that I had inserted into the airbrush for the 0.2mm set, and it's as easy as taking off the airhead, the fluid nozzle, the nozzle cap and the needle from the back of the airbrush. Here I'm just replacing the 0.2mm front to the airbrush and the needle. If you press the trigger and slowly place the airbrush needle to the front of the airbrush. I'm just going to replace the handle on, and there we have it, swapped over the needle set nice and easily, and now our airbrush is able to spray much smaller and finer lines. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please hit the like button guys. And I'd like to also say a huge thank you to everythingairbrush.com who supplied all the products for this video. You'll find direct links to everythingairbrush.com and the products that I've used in this video down below in the description box. In the next video in this series of how to airbrush for the absolute beginner, we're going to be painting a model. Hopefully I'll have this video ready within the next month or two, and if this video has been up for a while, I'll put a direct link on this video so you can go straight over to that. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video guys.